This is Marina Jenkins, Executive Director of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee.
I'm John Bizignano, President of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee.
And this is Drawing the Line, a podcast about the maps that shape our democracy and what it takes to make sure every vote counts. Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Drawing the Line. Today we're going to talk about Wisconsin, very important state and epicenter of some really, really critical fights for our democracy. Why don't we start with what's happening right now? There is a Supreme Court election on April 1st coming right up. And this election is for not only a seat on the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, but for the majority on that court.
And look, I think folks need to remember that although this election feels a bit weird, it's not, right? They do this every April, and it's unorthodox with regards to other states, but it is pretty normal for the folks in Wisconsin. So it's not something where you're building for a special election like you have to do sometimes. Oddly enough, there's also elections in Florida on April 1st. Both of those are special elections. But in Wisconsin, every April, there's judicial elections. Sometimes there are other things associated with the race, but for the most part, the top of the ballot ends up being the Supreme Court seats. And our organization, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, has been engaging in these seats since 2017.
For this year, the candidates are progressive Judge Susan Crawford, and that NDRC has endorsed and that we are supporting. And she's running against the former Attorney General Brad Schimel, who's pretty extreme guy. From our perspective, Susan Crawford is the right candidate. She's a champion of voters on crucial issues on, working people, protecting working people, protecting reproductive rights, protecting voting rights, all of these critical issues that state Supreme Courts are so important on. She has an incredibly strong record on those issues, and we're really excited and optimistic that she'll be able to join the court and be able to continue to protect Wisconsin voters' rights on all of those issues.
Yeah, and it's not super complicated. I mean, in this instance, she is the candidate of the two that believes in a representative democracy, which is something our organization has championed from the beginning. And sometimes I think people get into the weeds on which candidate represents what thing. And for us, it's not that complicated. She has always stood for people being able to vote and then actually adhering to what that vote is, and a free and fair election being core to what she believes in, which is great. It seems logical. It used to be logical. It used to be a fun thing that people would say was normal. Both parties care about a free and fair election. Unfortunately, in recent years, that's no longer the case. So yeah, in this instance, it's very clear which of the two candidates believes that to be true.
Yeah. And it's incredibly important for Wisconsin. Wisconsin currently has a progressive majority on the state Supreme Court. And as you noted, our involvement in protecting that court and building to this point, Wisconsin has not had a progressive majority on its state Supreme Court for a long time. In fact, just 6 or 7 years ago, that seemed like a really far off possibility. And so, maybe it's helpful to talk a little bit about where we've come from to this point where we are actually protecting the progressive majority on this court as opposed to trying to flip it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the truth is, as I noted, we've been engaging in these, and a lot of this has been at AG Holder's direction, who chairs our organization, but has always championed a long game view and has looked at democracy and civil rights issues as long-term investments in society, trying to create a democratic ecosystem where every vote counts, one person, one vote. And so a long time ago in 2017, late in 2017, we began this process of engaging in an election for Supreme Court in Wisconsin. Personally, I went to Wisconsin a lot. I think I got some level on American Airlines, some absurd level higher than I've ever had before, just going back and forth to Wisconsin. And a lot of that engagement came because in Wisconsin, there was a dramatically difficult ecosystem at play because they've been defeated for so long. And like Scott Walker had just been, he was continuing to engage and reign over that state with an iron fist, not unlike what we maybe are experiencing right now at the federal level with Donald Trump. But Scott Walker had such a stranglehold on that entire state's both economy and ecosystem, political ecosystem, that it made it really, really difficult to engage. And you have to remember, it's easy to look now and say, oh yeah, like this was a long road back in Wisconsin, but we won it and it was easy and it just kind of happened. In truth, it took a lot of work and it took a lot of emotional investment for folks that weren't necessarily ready to do that early in the process. There are really amazing people on the ground in Wisconsin that took a gamble on that first Supreme Court race after the 2016 election to say, okay, even though Hillary Clinton just lost the presidency to Donald Trump, even though Scott Walker is still the governor, even though our Supreme Court feels way out of reach, we're still going to start now. You have to start somewhere. We're going to start now, and we're going to rebuild this Supreme Court to a place where it's actually governed by people that care about democracy. And so we began in 2017. That work took a lot of time and effort and engagement with groups on the ground. And I'm so grateful for all of the folks that did pitch in and care. And now we're experiencing this new reality where folks are looking at Supreme Court races around the country and saying like, oh, these are interesting now. Like I do care about these. It's great. Like that's what we want. We wanted to elevate races that had been flying under the radar and frankly had been extremely well funded on the Republican side. And Republicans continue for a long time. And we had to elevate them and create a new paradigm in which we were able to be successful in them.
Yeah. And a little bit of historical context I'll add to that, which we talked about previously when we were talking about North Carolina, the timing, right? Because you're talking about the 2018 election for the Wisconsin Supreme Court. What's also happening at this time, specifically around redistricting, but around so many other issues, is the fight to try and get federal courts, and specifically the U.S. Supreme Court, to engage on the issues that we care about, to protect voters in these ways. And also, similarly, right, understanding that a Trump presidency inevitably meant adding additional conservative voices to the U.S. Supreme Court, and sort of what that would do to the idea that the federal courts could be a place where people could turn to have their rights protected. And so that's sort of simultaneously happening as we are sort of shifting this focus onto state Supreme Courts. And obviously, ultimately in 2019, the Supreme Court made it clear with respect to redistricting, in respect to partisan gerrymandering, that it was not going to engage, that it was going to leave that to state courts. Chief Justice Roberts specifically said that state Supreme Courts would be the place for, voters to get their rights vindicated in this specific regard. But then obviously what we know since then is, on abortion rights, on, so many other important aspects of our lives, the U.S. Supreme Court is just not a friendly venue, and they're not going to be a protector of rights. They're not going to be an expander of rights. They're contracting rights. They're taking away. And under the guise of like, well, now it's just up to the states. We're going to leave everything up to the states. So the state Supreme Courts, which, and I think back in 2018, we had a sense that this was coming, even though it hadn't happened yet. That this has just become such an important place for people to seek, the protection of their rights. And the Wisconsin Supreme Court has already shown that it's so important, on redistricting, on abortion rights, on all these critical issues, on workers' rights, on labor, like on all of these issues. The state Supreme Court is the place where you can get rights protected for now. And we need to keep it that way.
Well, two things on that, though. One, we should be clear, and Donald Trump consistently says he's moving things back to the states, which he started with around abortion, and then he continues to say about any number of issues. They do that, and then they go and gerrymander the shit out of the states.
Right.
So, like, if you have a stranglehold on minority rule in these states, of course you want to move it back to the states. That's what they're trying to do, because they go gerrymander the hell out of the state, and then they say, all right, yeah, well, it's in the state's hands, which, it's now controlled by a 30% of the population that cares about a certain issue. So that's the one thing that drives me crazy.
Yeah.
But the second thing, on just to take a beat on Rucho, which is the
Mm.
Supreme Court case that Marina was referencing on gerrymandering, and the U.S. Supreme Court's lack of a willingness to take up political gerrymandering as an issue. The truth is, they looked at, and they've taken a number of political gerrymandering cases over time, but they looked at this case and they did this thing where they just threw their hands up and said, how could we possibly know if
Mm.
something's gerrymandered? Like, how could we? We're so dumb. We could never understand. We could never be the ones to actually understand. And it's crazy. Like, these are the same people that are comfortable
Yeah.
saying, I will tell who can do what on reproductive rights, what women are
Right.
allowed to do with their bodies. I'm comfortable saying that. I think that is something I'm comfortable being a full determinant of. But when faced with massive data and a clear reality that people's votes are being counted and diluted via gerrymandering, they say we could never fully understand. It's completely absurd. And it was a mistake. It was a
Yeah.
mistake. Supreme Court should not have made that ruling.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
still dealing with the repercussions of that.
And I think, you can also see very clearly that when Trump says, well, let's send it to the states, let the states decide, that the same, heavy thumb that Republicans have tried to put in state races, obviously in the presidential race, we're seeing happen in the state races as well. Specifically, Elon Musk coming into Wisconsin and spending millions of dollars in races that historically have not involved this much money being thrown around. I think one report I saw had $3.2 million being spent in support of Brad Schimel, the conservative candidate for this state Supreme Court seat. So, just as he did with respect to the presidential, Musk is trying to buy his way into influence and control ultimately over this state judicial body. And so this is incredibly alarming, not just because, the purported, theory of like, oh, all of this stuff should be up to the states, but exactly as you're saying, Biz, just as the states are super gerrymandered. So yeah, you're sending it back to the states, but you don't actually have majority rule in these gerrymandered states. You have, rule by the minority who've drawn the lines so that they can have the ultimate say over what happens, even if that's not something that matches what people want and what popular opinion would tell you. That you're now going to have judicial bodies that are under that same kind of political influence, political pressure to just do the bidding of the people who bought their seats.
Yeah, and he's before the court. One of his companies
Mm-hmm.
before that court with a case. And just so folks fully appreciate it, we say he's spending $3.2 million. We've seen some of those ads now that his PAC is running. First of all, they started by running an ad that used the wrong image for Susan Crawford. They pulled the wrong Susan Crawford, because who could be bothered to
It's
suss
just
through all of the Susan Crawfords in Wisconsin?
so
But these ads are mostly focused on tearing Susan Crawford down, and most of them are using just simple anti-women tropes. It's like
mm-hmm.
calling her crazy, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just like, she's crazy. You can't trust a crazy person. It's like, it's very it's a bit juvenile, but also
Yeah.
it's troubling, because he's spending this much money just to try and destroy someone so that he can, as you noted, Marina, own another person inside a government.
Right.
And when you have $400 million or whatever, $1 billion or whatever
Yeah.
he has, I understand that maybe it doesn't make a difference, but when you're out here running a Doge efficiency organization, and you're cutting people's jobs left and right in this country, and yet pocketing billions of dollars in subsidies and contracts,
Yeah.
you start to wonder, obviously how this is happening and why this is happening.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And the grift is so obvious. The fact that, Tesla's got litigation in front of, Wisconsin state courts, and now suddenly Elon Musk, needs to weigh into this race and, put such a heavy, thumb on the scale at the, when it's like, this is about the people of Wisconsin. But his pockets need to be lined. He needs to be protected from any accountability, himself or, his corporations. And that's ultimately what his interest seems to be. It's, yeah. But the candidate, Brad Schimel, should not get off scot-free, yeah. Right? I mean, or, Musk is getting involved in this race. Trump, sort of peripherally involved in part because the candidate, Brad Schimel, has sort of been invoking him and sort of promising his supporters like, oh, Trump's going to endorse me any day now. I know that he's going to want someone like me, someone who thinks that an 1849 law on abortion should still be on the books in Wisconsin, right? Someone super extreme. So, he's sort of seems to be inviting and seeking out this endorsement from Trump. We haven't seen it yet. Who knows? But this guy is an extreme candidate, and he's leaning into it, right? In this moment, he's being emboldened to lean into those extreme positions, thinking that that's what Musk and Trump want. And so they're going to, those are his buddies who can come and help him win and get the seat. If the more extreme he is. And that's just, it's so out of control. It's kind of hard to imagine that this is where we are, but this is where we are. One additional point on that is just, there was a hot mic moment. Schimel was at a fundraiser, and he, apparently there's, something about January 6th and, sort of like, oh, what's going to happen if, God forbid we have rights and, people and we don't get, they don't get the crazy, world order that they're trying to create for themselves. And, he basically suggested that there should be violence. And this is someone who is, a judge who is seeking to be a justice on the state's highest court, and he's suggesting that political violence might be a tool that is necessary for them to reach their political aims. I mean, it's really incredibly dangerous.
He was the attorney general of the state. He used to be the attorney general of the state. He's like the person that would prosecute that. Anyways, it's really scary. It's really scary. But if you live in Wisconsin, if you know anyone in Wisconsin, call them, tell them to go vote. Go vote. Go vote for Susan Crawford, by my estimation.
Yeah. And I think, this has been a lot of doom and gloom about what's happening in the nationalization of this race and the way that these national players are weighing into this race. But, it is an interesting moment, and it is an opportunity for folks who are not happy with what's happening at the federal level, folks who are not happy with the possibility of going back in time to 1849 in terms of women's rights, to make their voices heard. As you noted, it's an April election in an odd year, right? Like, this is going to be typically a low turnout election, typically, people who are already very engaged, but it's really an opportunity for folks to get out and, connect with their community and connect with their neighbors and really make their voices heard. And so the more that we can, see how we can support that happening, and to have this be a high turnout election as opposed to a low turnout election, it really is an opportunity to particularly, speak against this idea that Trump and Musk have some sort of mandate to destroy everything that, our government stands for, everything that, we think America has supposedly stood for, they're trying to destroy. And it's an opportunity for voters to get out and say, not so fast, we actually deserve to have rights.
Yeah, I think I've worked on a lot of campaigns at this point, and a lot of presidential campaigns. There are really great folks in Wisconsin right now that are doing incredible work on the ground, making connections between human beings. Like
Right.
we have in COVID, there's a lot of reasons for this. There's like COVID did a lot of this.
Yeah.
But the way that campaigns have been run since COVID started have been very difficult. It's been very difficult for the way we used to as Democrats, or I'm thinking back to like the Barack Obama's 2008 campaign or 2012 campaign, ran field programs that were very human centric, very person centric, very volunteer centric, and also creating bonds in communities that maybe didn't exist before. And I'm a big personal believer in that. And I think that we got to get back to that in a way that we haven't. I recognize that every campaign's different, and we've tried to run campaigns in different ways. There's a lot of folks right now that might tell you, you could find people that would tell you TV ads are the only way. You know, those people exist. You could find people that would say, actually, it's only digital. You know, we're always just one pithy tweet away from really getting everybody to change their mind. And I haven't seen a replacement for the real human interaction. And the work that's being done in Wisconsin right now is that. So they're doing a really good job with regards to with regards to volunteer-based canvassing and door knocking, which I'm excited about. Because that's the way we won it in 2017. And, you know, as I think back to that period of time, after 2016, there was this big resurgence for a lot of different reasons that we can get into on a different conversation. But there's a big resurgence in fields. Like you had donors and grassroots organizers and organizations reshaping the way that they were created. You had new organizations like Indivisible being created that were all focused on people and field centric. And we haven't seen that same type of energy. And I shouldn't even say energy. We haven't seen that same type of action since Trump was elected this time. But I do think the need for it is just as ripe as it's ever been. And as people are doing more digital organizing, which I'm not a person who's going to tell you we shouldn't do digital organizing or the digital presence isn't important. It's critical. But it shouldn't be the only way.
It's not a replacement.
It's not a replacement. It's not a replacement.
Yeah.
And so as we watch Wisconsin, we should be watching that way. And I'm grateful for, you know, people like Chairman Ben Wickler, and some of the organizations that were created after 16 are still going strong, like Block in Milwaukee, run by Angela Lang. It's like really great people that know how to do what I'm describing right now, and they're actively doing it for this election. So it's going to be, I think that is going to be a really critical component, because it's when you're up there with $3.2 million of digital ads,
right,
and TV, we're not going to see that same amount of money on the other side.
Yeah.
And so how does Susan Crawford adjust for that? And my argument would be you have to do it person to person, neighbor to neighbor, and really build community and relationships with people in a way that we haven't been able to do in recent memory. It's a time to restart.
Yeah. And I think it's an excellent moment. You know, I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out where to pour their energy in terms of, you know, an opposition, a resistance, as it were. And I think, you know, the comparisons to 2017 are hard because in 2017, obviously, when, you know, right after Trump's election the first time, you know, there was the Women's March. There, you know, people were women were knitting, you know, hats and sharing them on a plane, and it was, you know, to fly to DC, and it was an incredible amount of energy, an incredible moment, and it's different now, and we're in a different moment. You know, the Trump administration has its stuff together in a way that they didn't the first time. And that's, you know, it's a bigger hill that we have to climb. They're being more destructive more quickly. A lot of the wins that we had in Trump's first term were at least in part based on their own fumbling through what they were trying to accomplish and their own mistakes that they were making. And you know, as we've seen, the agenda right now of the Trump administration is just move fast and break things, and they're literally kneecapping the entire system of America's government, and our
it's pretty cool
place in the world order
when people's lives are on the line.
Just,
it's not like the break things mentality I understand when you're talking about like software coding.
right.
You're like, let's like break all the ways that we used to do it. We'll recode. When you're
Right.
talking about 80,000 veteran affairs employment individuals being laid off,
Right.
it's a different thing.
American democracy is not a startup. Like,
it's not.
It's just not.
Nor is it a for-profit business.
Exactly.
I recognize a reality in which a government shouldn't be losing money, but also it's not a place where you need to be making money. In fact, when we're dealing with the situation we are right now, speaking of Musk's involvement in Wisconsin, where a smaller and shrinking number of billionaires have a massive voice in society and in politics, given Citizens United, the government used to be the only place where people had their say. We used to have one thing. We had one, right? One thing. People got their say in government, and that was it. Right. We don't get to pick who the billionaires are in the country, but we do get to pick who the leader is. We do get to pick who our representatives are. And when, voting rights are on the line, I think it's critical that pillar remain in place.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And,
people should have their say. It's a thing. It's a real thing.
Right. Well, and I think this Wisconsin election is so interesting. Like, the timing it will be so informative, I think, is as to the general narrative as to, like, I think what Trump, you listen to a press conference, or you listen to the White House press briefings, or, anything coming out of the administration, and they just talk like these are foregone conclusions that most people agree with. Like, they just, and it's just like his approach of just lying, right? It's just, I mean, his joint address, it's just all false. Like, just the presentation of reality is what they want. They're trying to, just essentially manifest their own reality.
Right.
And it's just not true. And it's up to all of us, frankly, to assert that it's not true, and to, ensure that we're pushing back against that manipulation of our reality, right? Like, they think they can say the sky is red, and nobody can say the sky is blue. And we can talk at length in another conversation about, we got into the other day, like, data, and just how, the ability for folks to have facts and information to challenge the lies that are coming out of the administration, and how important that is. But ultimately, they're just trying to produce this narrative that, like, well, this is what everybody wants. There was some, I can't remember who, it was one of the Republican congresswomen who did a town hall and, just got destroyed. And there's one clip of her, and she's like, well, there's a mandate, and people booed her. And she literally, like, you can see her kind of like, isn't there a mandate? Like, you can just like see on her face that she's like,
watch it.
This is what I've been told is real, and these are my talking points. And, like, aren't you guys all with me? Don't you all agree that there's a mandate? And obviously nobody in the room agreed with her.
I was told there'd be cake at this party.
She didn't run away like the other guy did, which
Kansas
was
senator.
quite amazing. Yeah. Senate. Yeah. Anyway, that's
like, when you talk about the data, though, I do think it's important. I can say right now, we have seen polling. There's been very clear that Elon Musk is toxic in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
That's to voters, right? So that's a fact. And I think one of the interesting things we're going to learn coming out of this election is how much does $3.2 million buy you? Because the other reality is Elon Musk is not a person, seemingly, that is able to distinguish himself from something. He's going to make this whole race about him. Like, he's out there Xing, whatever he's doing. He's posting on his platform,
on his own platform that he named his
Truth
after,
Social,
or that vice versa.
About this race, he is not a person that's able to distinguish between his own reality, right? Like, he is drinking all of his own Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And so we will see if the voters in state appreciate his continued dialogue, because we're already seeing Schimel talk about him in a way that is glowing, right? He knows. It's just this weird reality where we used to have Republicans maybe that tried to glue themselves to certain factions of their party or tried to like go further right. But we never
Yeah.
really saw individuals say, there's only two people in the country I need to make happy. Right.
Right.
And that's what he's doing. It's not
Right.
like I need to make sure that my local Republican committees are happy, or I need to make sure that the state part. It's like there's two people. It's Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And
Yeah.
I'm going to make sure that those two people are happy. And if they're happy, then I get to win or whatever he thinks.
Yeah.
Anyways, a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do on the ground.
Yeah.
Get out there in Wisconsin.
Yeah. If you live in Wisconsin, if you have friends or family in Wisconsin, call them up, talk to them, go and visit, knock on some doors.
Go to the state party, go to your local office, meet some people.
And our chairman, AG Holder, will be in state this month. So we're excited for him to get to go and meet with folks who are doing the work and do what we can to support them. Because, as you know, that's where the work is most important. And as you know, like when you have the richest man on earth pouring millions of dollars into, a small race in the spring of an odd year, the only thing that is going to beat that back is good organizing and, the power of the people. And so, it's an opportunity for folks to show that is still ultimately the most powerful thing that you can do, that we can all do, and that there's no amount of money that can just buy our government.
Yeah, we still get to have a voice.
Yeah.
As we wrap up today's episode, we want to urge our Wisconsin listeners to make sure your voice is heard and get out and vote on Tuesday, April 1st.
And if you're not in Wisconsin, you can still play a vital role. Text MAPS to 36787 to receive the latest redistricting updates. The fight isn't over, and there is still so much work to be done.
If you like our show, please follow us on YouTube and Instagram at Dem Redistrict, or visit our website at democraticredistricting.com. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, y'all.
This show is produced by Reed Dudley, Sophia Pedroso, and Manuel Marce. Special thanks to Alex Yang. Editing and mixing by Play Pretend Media. This podcast is paid for by the National Democratic Redistricting Committee.